everyone, and welcome to my channel. Yes, welcome to my channel because this is my first video. Call me Chickens for now. And this video we're going to talk about the 12 books I read in the summer of 2023. So there's a few things I want to note before we get started talking about the books. First was that summer started earlier for me because I was in college right now and school ended in April, where in the past it has usually ended in June. So if any of you are wondering, how did you read like 12 books over the course of 2 months? This wasn't over the course of 2 months. This was over the course of about like 4 months. And then, so I have the physical copies of 9 of these books, and then the other 3 I borrowed from the church library. That will not be the case with the majority of the books I'm going to be reading this summer. So there's that. And also, the last thing I want to note is that I didn't give star ratings for this book. This is when I wasn't really rating books, so other than that, let's jump right into it. The first book I read in the summer of 2023 was Delighting in the Trinity by Michael Reeves. I first heard about this book through the Bible Recap. The host of the Bible Recap, Tara Lee Koppel, mentioned this book as, I don't want to put words in my mouth, foundational, essential, but needed for understanding the Trinity. So this book, I feel like I need to read this book again because when I first read this was again, I was like just done Bible college, well at least my first year, and I had already read like a lot of fiction, not fiction, I'd read a lot of non-fiction. And so this is just another non-fiction book, so now I was really wanting to get back into reading fiction again. So for this book, I feel like I need to read it again because I wasn't really trying to absorb a lot of what was in this book. I was just trying to like get through it so I could get to the next book. And the next book was Once Upon a Wardrobe by Patti Callahan. I first heard about this book from another YouTuber named Harmony. I will link her channel down below. She loved this book, and I was really looking forward to reading this because I wanted to get back to fiction and stuff. And let's just say I would read 2 chapters a day, and while I was reading each chapter I'd be like, okay, how much longer is this chapter? Which, is not how I want to feel while reading a fiction book. I think there are a few reasons for that. The one of which is like a few months earlier, my family and I had gone to see this movie about C.S. Lewis's life. Oh, I just realized I should probably give a synopsis of this book. So, this book is about a 17-year-old girl named Meg, and she goes to Oxford. She's very like mathematical, a lot of good stuff, but she has a little brother named George, who's he's got some sort of like heart disease or something, and he loves and is captivated by this story of Narnia, particularly the one The Witch in the Wardrobe, and at Oxford is where C.S. Lewis teaches, and so George wants his sister Meg to ask him about where Narnia came from. So she goes to C.S. Lewis and asks him about this, and then C.S. Lewis ends up like telling like a bunch of stories from his life and stuff, and so Meg writes it all down and she tells it to her little George. So I was really looking forward to get into fiction, but I would read 2 chapters a day, and I wouldn't enjoy reading those 2 chapters. It wasn't drawing me in. So I think the reasons for that is one, my family and I a few months prior had gone to see this movie about C.S. Lewis's life, and I did not like that movie, which is kind of funny because like in like grade 8, I was doing this like reading challenge where we had to read like a book from like each different genre in the library, and I did end up reading a biography of C.S. Lewis, and I actually really enjoyed it. I don't remember who wrote it. I do remember what the cover looked like, so maybe I can put it up here if I can find it. So I enjoyed that, but for some reason I didn't like this movie, and I didn't really like this. So there's that. And another reason, because like the brother George, it kind of says on the, well, not the back, because this is one of those books that doesn't have the plot on the back. It says that, oh, it actually does say he doesn't have long to live, but whatever synopsis I had read, it didn't tell me that the little brother George probably wasn't going to live very long, so then I read and I was kind of sad, in which, like, I don't mind, well, I don't know, maybe I do mind, like, there's nothing wrong with sad books. In fact, some really good books I've read have been sad books, but I feel like this book didn't even really commit to being a sad book, if that makes sense, because again, the focus is more, in this book, is more on C.S. Lewis's life, and kind of less on the, yeah, and I don't know if this would have made a difference, but this is kind of more of a winter book, and I read it in, like, May, so maybe that was also part of this, like, and there wasn't really any problems I had, like, with the story. Like, this is not a bad book by any stretch of the word. I'm starting to wondering if maybe, like, I wasn't in, like, the right mental headspace to enjoy this book, so I think I'm gonna reread this sometime in the future, sometime in the winter maybe, and we'll see if I like it any better. And unfortunately, that was kind of a theme with a lot of these books, that they didn't really draw me in and make me want to keep reading. So the next book I read, I don't have a physical copy of it because I borrowed it from the church library, but I'll maybe put it up here if I can figure out how to do that. And that book is Pretense by Lori Wick. So I realized now, like, after reading this book, the description on the back, at least on the cover that I have, isn't the most accurate to what it actually is. The description on the back kind of makes it that it's about, like, these two sisters who, like, at least I interpreted it, that they kind of don't get along and they have to learn to, like, bond after stuff happens. That is not the most accurate. The first part of this book is more focused on the girls' parents, particularly their mom, Meryl, and the sisters, they actually do kind of get along for the most part. That isn't really a struggle throughout the book. So, I don't really know how to give an accurate synopsis of this book. I did see on Goodreads, it has, like, the old description of it, and then it has, like, a newer, like, description of it, which is more accurate, so look it up. You could probably describe the book better than I can. So, I actually started this book the previous summer, so the summer of 2022. I also took it out of the church library then, and I got to about, I think, chapter 11 before I was like, there's no way I'm going to finish this book during this summer, so I gave it back, planning to pick it up again in the future. So I did pick it up, and I did read it in the summer of 2023, and so, as you may have picked up by that, this book is really long. I tried to look it up, and when I looked it up on, like, Goodreads and Amazon to see how long, I was like, wait, no, it can't be that long, is it? So I went back to the church library and looked it up to see, and no, it was right. This book is, like, about 700 pages. I want to say it could have been shorter, but I don't know exactly what parts I would cut out to make it shorter. So yeah, there's that. In general, like, again, didn't really jump me in, but, like, it was okay, I guess. There are a few, like, tragedies that happen in the book. One is apparently not a spoiler, because it's, like, not on the back, but in, like, this little thing that you have on some books. There was, I think, two problems I kind of had with the story. One I'm not going to mention, but this other one, and I don't think this is a spoiler to explain this, but I'm sorry in advance if this is. But, so one of the sisters, Mackenzie, she gets a compliment from this boy named Brett Cooper, and I remember that name because of the YouTuber Daily Wire person named Brett Cooper. And it's kind of it's kind of hinted, at least that's how I got it, that there's gonna be some sort of romance between these two. But then that like goes nowhere, and then she later says, "Oh, he's a jerk," but we'd never really find out like what happened between them to make them say that. And I'm just kind of like, for you to be about like 700 pages and not explain what happened between the two, like, what's going on? I mean, maybe she thought it wasn't relevant to the story, but if that's the case, then why not cut him out of the book entirely? Like, I don't want to say he's completely unnecessary to the story, because I don't really know, but anyways, that's my thoughts on Pretense. The next book I read, well, actually, I read the majority of this book like around Christmas break of 2023, well, 2022 to 2023. Yeah, I read the majority of this book then, but I finished it in the summer of 2023. And that book is Another Gospel by Alisa Childers. Well, Alisa Childers, however you say it. So, this book, I will have a synopsis this time, even though this is a non-fiction book. So, this book is about Alisa Childers. She was kind of a part of the band Zoe Girl, and this talks about her experience going to a progressive Christian church and going through kind of a crisis of faith herself, trying to figure out what she believes, and kind of her going through like the progressive Christianity and how it kind of conflicts with the Bible, and kind of there's kind of apologetic space in here. And I actually enjoyed this kind of more than I expected it to, considering it was non-fiction. So that's pretty nice. And then I was very closer to finishing it. So when I did finish it, then I was kind of like, oh no, I wanted more. So yeah, and I don't really know what else to say about this one. It's good. Recommend. And the next book I read, again, don't have a physical copy of it. So again, up here is Fire by Night by Lynn Austin. This is the second book in a series. We'll talk about that later. Honestly, I probably should have DNF'd this book. DNF, for those who don't know, it means did not finish. So that means you stop reading it and don't go back to it. So I should have done it with this book, because again, the first part it wasn't drawing me in, but then the next part of it, I was getting anxious about something happening that I thought was gonna happen. Well, I'll explain that later, because that part's gonna explain spoilers, so I'll have a spoiler warning. But again, this book is kind of boring, and so this story focuses on the stories of two women, Julia and Phoebe. And Phoebe's story is kind of like a Mulan type story. She disguises herself as a man and joins the army. And that sounds really fun, right? But no, her chapters of her being in the army were so boring. How do you make a Mulan type story boring? Well, apparently having as little dialogue as possible and more descriptions. Actually, maybe this should be a good time to mention, I don't really like descriptions in books, because I always feel like I can't properly picture what the author is trying to get across. So, yeah, did not like that. I think the reason I didn't DNF this book is because it's the second book in a series. The series is called Refiner's Fire, I believe it's called. The first book being Candle in the Darkness, and I read Candle in the Darkness in high school, and that was good. But here's the thing about this series, is that you could literally read any of these books as standalones and not get confused. Like, they're not really that connected. Like, some characters are kind of mentioned in the different books, but there's nothing in the second book that you need to understand the third book. Like, so, yeah. And also, this series, well, particularly the first book, Candle in the Darkness, was recommended by a friend, and she said that, like, I'm not sure if she said the second book or another book. She said another book in this series is about her cousin, and I for some reason thought that she was talking about like the cousin that was like forced slavery, because this takes place in the Civil War era. So yeah, it takes place. I thought that was going to be the cousin that we were going to be protected from, but no, we get the perspective of random Julia that, like, I don't know, like, well, like the book from the perspective of her cousin that was forced slavery. I feel like that would have been a more interesting book than this. So I might as well get into the spoiler-filled section. So if you have not read Fire by Night by Lynn Austin, and for some reason you want to, skip to this timestamp and come back. Okay, so the kind of main perspective of this book is from this girl, Julia, who's Caroline's cousin, Caroline being the protagonist of the first book. And so she has this eye on this preacher, Nathaniel Green, but he does not want her because he thinks that she's spoiled and like all this stuff. So she tries to prove him wrong by becoming a nurse, even though everything is stopping her from becoming a nurse. And it kind of works because they end up getting engaged, but before that happens, Julia ends up kissing this like doctor that she's working with. Well, they both end up kissing, and then as soon as they did that, I was like, oh, these two are gonna end up together. Only to be reminded, like a page or two later, that this doctor was married, and then I was like, never mind. But then, as I got further into the book, I ended up realizing, wait a minute, they probably still are gonna end up together. She wouldn't have thrown in that kiss in for no reason. So then I was getting anxious about this happening, and I was right. They kill off his wife. Well, not really kill off. It seems kind of implied that she died a lot earlier, and they end up together. Here's the thing, Lynn Austin. If you wanted these two to end up together, you could have just made him not married. Like, why? Why did you make him married? Like, I think I might know why. Maybe it's because then they could have this kiss where they both think that the other one is married but the other one isn't, because she also lied about being married in order to become a nurse. But that's not a good thing. And apparently, like, I'm in the minority because a lot of people who read this book love it. But ladies, like, listen up. Like, this guy, even though he wasn't married, he kissed her thinking that she was married. And it doesn't matter that she wasn't actually. He kissed her thinking that. Shouldn't that tell you something? I think there might have been something else I wanted to say, but I can't remember it right now. So anyways, the majority of people who read this book like this book. But I did find on Goodreads this 2-star review who also didn't like this book. So I'm gonna read some of what she says because I agree with it. The whole deal with Julia lying about being married, I get that, okay, but it also bothered me. And then the fact that Julia thought the doctor was married worsened the issue. Then they become attracted to each other when both think the other's married. And they kiss thinking that. When I was reading it, it didn't click, but once I was done, it hit me. How convenient neither one was married. What if they had been? I mean, really. Also, the doctor does grow on one. I'll admit I was kind of rooting for him. I was not. But he's very crude, and some of his comments made me cringe. I understand it had to do with his past, and he did change for the better. But, and then she says, toward the end I wanted to throw something at Julia. I was so mad with her. Basically, the reason why she chose the doctor, I cannot remember his name, neither can I, over Nathaniel Green, which was portrayed as very nice at the beginning and then everything changed, was because he kissed better. I'm serious. I'm not sure. Well, having read the book, I disagree with that. I think it was more because Nathaniel Green didn't want her to be a nurse. So, yeah, there's that. So maybe Nathaniel wasn't the one for her, and maybe he didn't love her truly, but to base that all on a kiss, I'm sorry, that is dreadful. And then later on, she says, also, stories about a rogue guy who has, she says, correct her, who has a terrible background. Why can't there be more books with godly young men that do have struggles but aren't distasteful in their words and action? And that's, I think, a really good point. Like, why aren't we setting, like, better examples for, like, young women? So, anyways, yeah. Next book I read, well, I started this book around the time that I was reading Fire by Night, but I didn't finish it until like a lot later in the summer. So while I was reading Fire by Night, because I was going like very slowly through it. Actually, that was another thing I wanted to mention, is that since I was getting anxious, I was reading the book slower, like only reading like very little each day. It probably took me longer to finish Fire by Night than it took me to finish Pretense. I don't think I'm kidding. So so I was slow going through Fire by Night, but I still wanted to be reading, so I thought, okay, let's read a book that you know you're gonna like because you read it as a kid and loved it. So, the next book I read was Sorry I'm Not Sorry by Nancy Rue. This is the third book in the Mean Girl Makeover trilogy. This trilogy is about like bullying from like different perspectives. So the first book is from the perspective of the bystander, the second book is from the perspective of the victim, and the third book, this book, is from the perspective of the bully. And I really wanted to read this one when I first got the series because I wanted to understand what the bully was doing. So, kind of maybe unsurprisingly, this book ended up being my favorite out of the three. I've reread parts of it so many times, so I thought to read this book, considering how much I liked it as a kid. And it didn't draw me in as much as it did when I was a kid. So there's that. Again, maybe I wasn't in the right headspace to do it. But yeah, this book, this whole series. So I'm one, and I also recently like started rereading the first book because I remember in recent years that one drawing me in. And I mean, yeah, the first book is also really good. So the series, read it, even though this is more targeted at middle schoolers. The next book I read was A Journey of Hope in a Silent... So the next book I read was A Silent Tears, A Journey of Hope in a Chinese Orphanage by Kay Bratt. So this book is actually a kind of compilation of Kay Bratt's journal entries from her time in China volunteering at an orphanage. So this is my first time annotating a book. I've never really, well, I've highlighted things in my Bible before and maybe highlighted something, but this is the first time like highlighting and tabbing things in a book, as you could probably tell. This book, I picked this up because like I've had this like fascination with like orphanages, or really just any place where lots of kids are living there since I was like a kid. So I wanted to read this book. In this book, it wasn't what I expected, which made it like a little disappointing. Like, it was sadder than I expected it to be, which I don't know why I didn't expect it to be sad. I mean, we're literally talking about a Chinese orphanage and like kids who are abandoned and have like, but anyways, but also this woman, Kay Bratt, she mainly ended up volunteering with like babies and stuff, which kind of just reminded me of my volunteering with little kids, which I had become disillusioned with by the time I was reading this book. So, like, actually another book that's kind of more, maybe not expecting from this book, but kind of like this, kind of more book is actually this book, Castaway Kid. I read this summer of 2022, I think, and this is kind of more from a kid who grew up in an orphanage and his experience there. And I like this better because it was kind of more talked about like what it was like for the kids. And this one is just kind of more volunteers. So yeah, I don't know, like, thank goodness I wasn't really doing ratings, because I don't know how I could rate this book, because this is literally like someone's journal entries, like this stuff actually happened. So how are you gonna rate this? Anyways, I don't have much else to say. The next book I read and don't have a physical copy, this one. This was the last one I believe I took out from the library. So, and that book is A Light to My Path by Lynn Austin. This is the third book in the Refiner's Fire series. Again, don't really need the other books to understand this book. I don't have a whole lot to say about this one. I read the majority of this book in like one day because after taking so long to finish Fire by Night, after taking so long to finish Fire by Night, I realized there wasn't that much time in the summer left, so I was like, oh no, how am I gonna get in all the books I want to read? So I started like doing this thing of having days where I would dedicate to reading these books, and I would end up usually finishing the book I was currently reading in that day. So yeah, I read A Light to My Path in one day. I mean, I certainly liked it better than Fire by Night, but it wasn't as good as Candle in the Darkness, which I think I'm going to talk about in like a feature video. But yeah, not more much to say about that one. The next book I read was Anne of Avonlea by L.M. Montgomery. So this is of course the, I guess you could say, sequel to Anne of Green Gables, that famous book. So I read this one. Again, read the majority of it in a day, although I had already started it when I read it, but I just put it down for a while. So this book, I mean, the same problem kind of existed in Anne of Green Gables. I remember thinking while reading Anne of Green Gables, this sounds like this way this is written, it kind of sounds like something I would write. So that's how I put it at the time. But there's actually a word for it, and that word is episodic. So just kind of just stories that there's not really anything to tie them all together. This book is even more episodic than Anne of Green Gables. I remember like reading this book and I got about halfway through and it felt like I had not made any progress in the story. Probably because there wasn't much of a story to make progress in, which, you know, I personally think episodic can work, but I think it can work more when like the world is interesting, like the world the story takes place in is interesting, but this world was not interesting, at least not to me. So yeah. The next book I read, well, this was actually a reread because I had to read, well, I'll get to that later. The next book I read was Gospel Fluency by Jeff Vanderstelt. Vanderstelt. Not Vanderstelt. Oh, you can totally not tell. This is my first time doing this. Okay, so this book, I had to read it for Bible college. Well, actually, I didn't have to read the whole thing, but I did anyways. And I remember, like, when I started reading this for the first time, I was thinking, oh no, this sounds really important, and I think I'm going to forget it. But then, of course, I later realized, hey, I could reread this again. I mean, I bought it. I could read this again. So that's what I did. I also annotated it. I'll also mention, I didn't annotate Anne of Avonlea because, I don't know, something about annotating old books just feels wrong to me. So yeah, I read this book and I annotated. I actually didn't annotate as much as I thought it was. I don't have a whole lot to say about this one, but yeah. The next book I read, and for some reason I still have the bookmark in it. Wait, did I not finish it? No, I did not finish it. So, the next book I read was Girl Code by Andrea Gonzalez and Sophie Hauser. I think that's how you pronounce their names. So, this is a book, again, this is true stories. So, two girls who are part of the Girls Who Code movement, they made this game and it kind of went viral. And, yeah, this is their story about it. I remember I bought this, like, randomly at a thrift store with my friend. Um, yeah. Actually, in the beginning, I liked it more than I thought it would, but then the rest of it, I don't, I don't know. Well, to me, it seemed a little woke. I don't know if I can point out like an exact thing you said that sounds that, but just kind of like the vibe I got. I mean, they did kind of bring up like some points that I actually think are valid, like about like the sexualization of women in like video games and stuff. Although I do want to say about like this kind of movement of like girls code and like all the movements of trying to get like more women into STEM fields. Like they're trying to get women into more male dominated industries, but you don't see movements to get men into more female dominated industries. Like you don't see this movement of trying to get more men in psychology or early childhood education or stuff. I remember one of my teachers at school first brought up that point, and I was like, huh, interesting. So, yeah, not a whole lot to say about that. I was meaning to annotate this one, but I didn't think anything was worthy of annotating, so. And the last, but certainly not least book I read, that was a really weird way to phrase that sentence, was The Maid by Nita Prose. Again, like Harmony did also read this book, but that was actually not the first place that I heard of this book. I first heard of this book from someone I follow named Alex Clark. She's part of Turning Point USA. She had well, it kind of still has, but it looks different. The show called Poplitics. I used to watch that religiously. Maybe we can talk about that another time. So she mentioned this book and she loved it, and Harmony mentioned it and this loved it, and she loved it. And I wasn't all that interested in reading it because this is kind of more of a mystery genre, and I never really read it. But I was one day I was at Walmart with my friend, and I saw this book on my shelf, and I was kind of like, oh, I recognize this book. So for some reason I picked it up and just decided to buy it and then read it. And I think the one thing that has kind of interested me about this book is that one thing that both Alex and Harmony said is that while it is never said explicitly, it seems that the main character, Molly, is on the autism spectrum, and I myself am on the autism spectrum, so I thought this will be interesting to read a book from their perspective of someone who has autism as an autistic person. And I think if I were to reread this, I would see more of what Nita Prose was trying to do. But I remember, like, while reading it, like, the first time I was kind of like, what about this girl makes her autistic? Like what is it? Like, I kind of see it now, but... And so I did annotate this book. Actually, there's one quote I actually opened right to it. There's one quote I thought was pretty funny. He knows something isn't right in the state of Denmark. What does Denmark have to do with any of this? I just thought this was kind of funny. Now, apparently, there's a bit of, I don't know if controversy is the right word, there's a bit of a split on this book because some people don't, and I actually first heard about this from Harmony, but apparently some people are mad about, like, Molly being autistic because they don't explicitly say it. So I wasn't sure, and then I looked on Goodreads, and sure enough, the first review I see is someone, like, having conversations with themselves, and I remember one person saying, like, oh, because different and quirky is a so much better word than autistic. And so, as an autistic person, I think the outrage about this comes from our society's need for people to put their identities into their immutable characteristics. Like, we see this all the time with, like, well, like, maybe less so with, like, race and gender, but, like, certainly with sexuality, people want to put their identities into that. And I maybe, I don't know if I, well, when I was younger and, like, first found out about it, I was definitely, like, all about, like, oh, look at me, I'm so special because I have mild autism and, like, all this stuff. But like now, I look back and realize like as a Christian, like my identity is in Christ. So, and this is like not a Christian book, but I'm just kind of like wondering like why does there have to be a label? Like why? Like why do they have to explicitly say it? Why can't Molly just be who she is without having to put a label on her? Like everyone, well, oh, like everyone figured it out. Like they're not fooling everyone. Like clearly, like everyone knows, and they love Molly regardless. So I think this is a win for autistic representation. So again, nice. So that was all the books. Now, oh wait, I'm not done talking about this one yet. So how did I actually like the book? Again, it didn't really draw me in, although I was reading like part of it a day, and I would like assign myself a certain number of chapters. And one time after assigning that, after not reading the chapter, I wanted to keep reading, but that was like one moment. Again, this is kind of my first time reading kind of more mystery book, so again, there's that. I will say like a lot of people are kind of like crazy about a character. Like it even says on the front here from Stephen King, the most interesting and endearing character in a long time. At least when I first read this, I wasn't that wild about her character. But again, I don't know if I wasn't found this character interesting. I don't know. I don't know what character I would find interesting. So here's that. Okay. So, about all these books. So why didn't most of these books draw me and make me want to keep reading? Again, maybe it was my mental headspace, but I also wonder if maybe the kind of books I was choosing was not the type of books that drew me in and made me want to keep reading. Because the kind of books that like drew me in the past, even in recent years, are what I call Christian teenage girl books. It's kind of books about like teenage girls written by Christian authors. Like I read a lot of Melody Carlson books in high school, and those often drew me in. I remember I finished one of those books over the course of like 3 days. So yeah, there's that. So the books that I picked this summer, they're kind of more in that vein. Like Christian teenage girl books are kind of teen fiction in general, like stuff like that. I've also, in making my very long TBR, I've added some more like World War II books because pretty much every World War II book I've read, even though I haven't read many, they've been good. So I hope those are read, and also the kind of around the same vein of books you had to read for school. I also found that those books were pretty good. Oh, why can't I speak today or any other day?
Why can't I speak today or any other day?
So yeah. So the next few videos I think I'm gonna talk about more books that I read over this school year, because somehow I made time to read books over this school year and actually reread a few books. So I'm gonna make a few videos about those, and then I think I'm gonna try to do reading vlogs for most of the books I'm reading this summer, and we'll see how it goes for there. Hope you guys enjoyed this video, and goodbye.